The Mafia boss saw the black, Maid feeding his son. What he did next shocked everyone. Emily stood quietly in the nursery, holding the baby close to her chest. Marco had been crying for what felt like hours, his tiny body racked with tears, his tiny hands flailing in desperation. The wealthy home was silent otherwise, its beauty and opulence surrounding them, but Emily could only focus on the little one in her arms. She knew she was breaking rules, but what choice did she have? The child was suffering, and she couldn't just stand there. For weeks now, nothing had worked. Marco's formula, prescribed by the best doctors, had only made him sicker, and his father, Vincent, was frantic, pacing the hallways. Emily had been nothing more than a housekeeper here, but for the first time, her maternal instincts kicked in. The baby's cries echoed in her heart, reminding her of her own lost child. She moved cautiously to the door of the nursery, checking to make sure no one was around, before she carefully unbuttoned her blouse and offered her breast to the little one. Her heart was heavy, torn by the knowledge of the risk she was taking. But when Marco latched on, a soft sigh of relief escaped her lips. The baby's cries slowed, his little body relaxing in her arms. Emily's mind raced as she rocked him gently. She could feel the weight of her actions in every moment. Her training told her to remain invisible, to never disrupt the master's home. But here she was, breaking the most sacred of rules. She had to do what was right, no matter the consequences. Minutes passed, and the nursery seemed quieter, calmer. She dared not breathe too deeply, afraid to jinx the fragile peace she had created. It was then that she heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the heavy footfalls that made the floorboards creak beneath their weight. She froze. Vincent, the Mafia boss. She knew he would never approve of what she was doing. He had strict rules, rules that no one, not even the staff, could ever defy. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she braced herself for his wrath. The door to the nursery creaked open, and there he was. Vincent. His cold eyes swept over the scene before him, taking in the sight of Emily, holding his son, her breast exposed as she nursed him. For a long moment, he said nothing, just watched. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't read his expression, but the tension in the air was palpable. She expected him to shout, to tell her to leave immediately. But he didn't. Instead, he stood there, watching her, his gaze unwavering. His eyes softened ever so slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was because of the act itself or something deeper. Then, finally, he spoke. What are you doing? His voice was low, but there was no anger. Emily, still holding Marco close, felt a wave of relief flood over her. He was hungry. He couldn't take the formula anymore. I thought, maybe this would help, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent stood still for a moment, his eyes flickering from Emily to his son, then back to her. There was something different in his gaze now, something that wasn't there before. His stern demeanor softened, just a little, as he walked closer to her. For a moment, Emily thought he might push her away, but instead, he knelt down beside her. You're not supposed to be here, he said quietly, his voice still controlled, but there was a hint of something else. Emily met his gaze, feeling the weight of the moment settle between them. She was still holding his child, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an invisible servant. She felt seen. Vincent's hand reached out, brushing the hair from Marco's forehead. You've done what no one else could do, he said, his voice softer now. He stood, then looked back at her, his face unreadable. I'll make sure you're compensated for this. You've earned my respect, Emily. His words hit her like a wave, and she felt a mix of shock and gratitude. She had risked everything, and in return, she had done something no one thought was possible. Emily could hardly believe it. In a home built on wealth, power, and strict rules, she had found an unexpected moment of connection. And for the first time, she realized that sometimes, breaking the rules could lead to something beautiful. As Vincent stood there in the nursery, his gaze still fixed on Emily, he felt an unexpected shift inside him. His mind, usually sharp and calculating, had always been one to measure everything, to control every detail of his life. But this moment, this simple act of compassion, had thrown him off balance. He watched as Emily carefully adjusted Marco in her arms, her movements tender and instinctive, the way any mother would treat her child. There was no hesitation in her touch, no fear of reprisal, just a quiet strength that stirred something deep within him. He had seen countless people cower before him, but here, in this woman, he saw something different. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't asking for anything in return. She was simply giving, offering comfort to his son when no one else could. His heart, hardened by years of power and control, was stirred by something he hadn't felt in a long time: admiration. "You can stay," he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the silence of the room. Emily looked up at him, startled by the calmness in his tone. "Stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent nodded, his eyes softening just a fraction. "You've done something no one else could. I don't forget that." For a moment, Emily didn't know how to respond. She had expected anger, punishment even, but not this. She had expected to be sent away, to be reminded of her place. But here, in this moment, Vincent's response was different. She felt a warmth inside her chest, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had only wanted to help. And somehow, in that act of kindness, she had earned something she had never expected: respect. "Thank you," Emily finally said, her voice shaking slightly. She wasn't sure if she was thanking him for the permission to stay or for something more, something deeper, something that had shifted between them. Vincent studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the door, but paused before leaving. "I'll make sure you're compensated for your time here," he said, his voice low and steady. "You'll be treated with the respect you deserve." As the door closed behind him, Emily stood there, stunned. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. Her duties around the house remained the same: cleaning, cooking, taking care of the daily tasks. But there was a shift. The way the other staff members looked at her had changed. They no longer saw her as just a maid, just another servant in the house. There was a subtle shift in their behavior, a new understanding of her role. But it was Vincent's behavior that truly caught her attention. He never acknowledged her directly again, not in front of the others. But in the quiet moments, when no one else was around, she could feel his eyes on her. Not with the cold detachment he usually reserved for everyone else, but with something else, something unspoken, something that hinted at a deeper connection. She wasn't sure what it was, but she could feel it. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. It was a week later when Vincent called her into his office. Emily entered the grand room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been summoned by him before, and she didn't know what to expect. Vincent was sitting behind his massive desk, looking over papers. As she entered, he looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "Come in," he said, his voice calm and commanding. But there was something softer in his eyes now. "Please sit." Emily hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from him. The room was silent for a long moment, the only sound the soft rustle of papers as Vincent continued to sift through them. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you did," he said, his voice measured. "And I've come to a decision." Emily's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had no idea what to expect, but she had a feeling that whatever Vincent was about to say would change everything. "From now on," Vincent continued, "you will have a different role here. I want you to stay close to Marco. Be his nanny." Emily blinked, surprised by his words. "His nanny?" she repeated. Vincent nodded. "Yes. You have a unique ability to calm him, to care for him in ways no one else can. I can't afford to lose that." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never imagined that something as simple as feeding Marco could lead to this. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Vincent's gaze softened as he stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. "You've earned more than just my respect," he said, his voice low. "You've earned a place in this family." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Was this real? Was he truly saying this? "I'll make sure you're taken care of," he added, his voice almost gentle now. "Anything you need, it's yours." The weight of his words settled on her, and she felt a mix of emotions flood through her. Gratitude, confusion, and something else, something deeper, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. But as she sat there, in that quiet moment, she knew one thing for certain. Her life was changing. She wasn't just Emily, the maid anymore. She was someone important. And in that moment, She realized that sometimes the most unexpected acts of kindness could change everything. The days that followed were quiet, but Emily could feel the subtle shift in the air. Her new role as Marco's nanny was not something she had expected, but it felt natural. She had always taken care of others, but this felt different. Vincent's trust in her was a heavy thing, but it was also a blessing. Every morning, she would go to Marco's room, gently picking him up from his crib. His small hands would grasp at her fingers, his sleepy eyes still half closed, and she would carry him to the window, letting him watch the morning light filter through the curtains. It was in these moments, when she held him close, that Emily could almost forget about the world outside. She could forget that she was just an employee in the mansion, that she had come from nothing. Here, with Marco, she was someone important. The days grew longer, and she settled into her new routine. Vincent rarely spoke to her directly, but there were moments when their eyes would meet across the room. In those brief exchanges, she felt a connection, something unspoken that grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, after Marco had taken his nap, Emily found herself sitting by the window, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her teacup. The house was unusually quiet. She had grown used to the steady hum of activity in the background, the footsteps of the other staff, the distant sounds of meetings in the executive rooms, and Vincent's occasional commands to his men. But today, the house felt still, almost as if time had paused for a moment. As she sipped her tea, she caught a glimpse of Vincent in the hallway. He wasn't dressed in his usual tailored suits, but instead in a more casual outfit. A black shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his tie discarded for the day. He wasn't the cold, calculating boss she had first met. There was something about him now that seemed vulnerable. Emily quickly looked away, not wanting him to notice her watching him. But it was too late. Vincent turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Emily," he said, his voice soft, not the commanding tone she was used to hearing. "I've been thinking about you." Emily felt a jolt in her chest, her heart racing as she tried to steady her breath. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Vincent," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "You're more than just a maid to me, Emily," he said, his words carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "I've never seen anyone care for Marco like you do. You've done something I can't ignore." Emily's mind raced. She had never expected this kind of attention from Vincent. She had never thought that a simple act of kindness, a quiet sacrifice for his son, would lead to this moment. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Vincent reached out, his hand brushing against the back of her chair. "I know this isn't easy," he continued, his tone lower now. "But I want you to know that you're not just here to work. You have a place here. A real place." Emily didn't know what to say. Her whole life, she had been invisible to those who mattered. But here, in this house, in this moment, Vincent was offering her something she had never imagined: acceptance. She had always known her place in the world, beneath others, always just a servant. But with Vincent, she felt like she could be more than that. She could be someone who mattered. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Vincent nodded slowly, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You deserve more than what you've been given, Emily," he said. "And I'll make sure you get it." Emily didn't know how to respond. For years, she had kept her head down, never asking for anything, never expecting anything. But now, with Vincent's words hanging in the air between them, she felt a glimmer of hope, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The weeks passed in a haze of quiet moments and soft exchanges. Emily's connection with Marco grew deeper, and she felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never known before. She spent her days caring for him, teaching him small words, watching him grow and change in ways that filled her heart with pride. As for Vincent, he remained distant in many ways, but the look in his eyes when he saw her with Marco was enough. It was clear to her now that he had come to value her in ways he hadn't expected. One evening, after Marco had gone to bed, Emily found herself alone in the living room, the fire crackling in the fireplace. She was lost in thought, her mind racing with questions she hadn't yet found the answers to. Was she truly changing Vincent's life? Was he changing hers? She didn't know, but she couldn't ignore the feelings stirring inside her. The warmth of his words, the way he had looked at her that day. There was something there, something she couldn't deny. And then, as if on cue, The door to the living room opened, and Vincent stepped inside. This time, there was no formality in his movements. He wasn't the Mafia boss now. He was just a man, standing in front of her, his eyes searching hers. "I don't know what this is, Emily," he said quietly, his voice low and filled with something she couldn't place. "But I can't ignore it. I can't pretend it's not there." Emily's heart raced as she looked up at him. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Vincent walked toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I mean this connection," he said. "I mean you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had never expected this, never imagined that something so simple as taking care of a child would lead her here, to this moment with him. Vincent reached out, his hand gently cupping her chin. "You've changed me, Emily," he said softly, "in ways I didn't think were possible." The following days felt like a blur to Emily. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed in ways she never expected. The trust that Vincent had placed in her, the quiet moments they shared, and the way he looked at her. It was all overwhelming, but also a little bit thrilling. She tried to keep her head down, focusing on caring for Marco, but there were moments when Vincent would catch her gaze from across the room, and she would feel her heart race. She had been a maid her entire life, always unseen, always the one to clean up other people's messes, but now she found herself in the middle of something far more complicated. One evening, after Marco had gone to bed, Emily found herself alone in the mansion's grand library, flipping through one of the many books that lined the shelves. She had always loved reading, but tonight, she couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept drifting back to Vincent and the words he had said to her earlier that day. "You've changed me, Emily," he had whispered. She couldn't shake those words. They felt like a weight, something important, something that had the power to shift everything. As she stared at the pages in front of her, she could hear footsteps behind her, and she turned to find Vincent standing in the doorway. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly stood, a nervous smile crossing her face. "Of course," she said, unsure of what was coming next. Vincent walked into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. He seemed different tonight, more relaxed, almost vulnerable. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice steady but carrying an edge of uncertainty. "About us. About everything." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Vincent stepped closer, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his trousers. "I know I've been distant, and I know that what I've said hasn't always made sense, but I can't ignore how I feel anymore. You've been a part of my life in ways I didn't expect, and I need to know if you feel the same." Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. This wasn't what she had expected. She had only wanted to take care of Marco, to do her job, and keep her head down. But now, Vincent was asking her to confront feelings she had tried to keep buried for so long. "I do feel the same," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "But I don't know what this is. I don't know what this means." Vincent stepped closer still, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers," he said. "I'm just asking you to trust me. Trust that I'm not just some cold, distant boss. That I see you, Emily. And I see what you've done for Marco. You've earned my trust, and you've earned more than just a job here. You've earned my respect." Emily's heart fluttered in her chest, and she felt a warmth spreading through her. For so long, she had been invisible. But now, here she was, standing in front of Vincent, a man who had once seemed so untouchable, and he was offering her something she had never dreamed of. "I don't know how to handle this," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "I've never been a part of something like this. I've always been the one cleaning, the one in the background." Vincent's expression softened further, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not in the background anymore," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You never were, not to me. I see you, Emily, and I want to see more of you. Not just as my employee, but as someone who matters. You matter to me." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. The words were so simple, but they carried such weight. She had never felt like she mattered to anyone, not really. But here was Vincent, offering her not just a job, but a place in his life. It was overwhelming. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made Emily's heart race. "We take it one step at a time," he said. "But I want you to know, you're not alone in this. You never will be." The weight of his words settled on her, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who saw her, who understood her, and who wanted to build something together. As Vincent stood there, looking at her, with those deep, knowing eyes, Emily felt something inside her stir, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready to face it, ready to take the next step, whatever it was. And with Vincent, she knew she wouldn't have to do it alone. The days that followed felt different to Emily. The air in the mansion seemed charged with a new energy, and she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in the way Vincent acted around her. The glances he would steal when he thought she wasn't looking, the small gestures of kindness that seemed to carry deeper meaning. It wasn't just that he trusted her with Marco now, it was more than that. She had begun to feel a quiet connection between them, one that she hadn't expected but was starting to acknowledge. But even though there were these small, unspoken moments, Emily knew she had to remain cautious. She had spent her life in the shadows, and she wasn't sure what it meant to step out of them. She wasn't sure what Vincent truly wanted from her. Still, she couldn't deny that something was changing. It was a cold evening when Vincent asked her to meet him in the study. Emily's heart skipped a beat when she received the message. She had grown used to her quiet role in the background, but now, everything was changing. She had no idea what he wanted to discuss, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was something important. She entered the study, finding Vincent already there, standing by the window. The soft glow of the lamps cast shadows over the room, but it wasn't the soft light that made her heart race. It was the look in his eyes. "Come in," he said, his voice low and inviting. Emily hesitated for just a second before walking toward him. As she approached, Vincent turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. There was no formality in his posture, no sense of distance. He was just a man, standing in front of her, and it felt like the world had shifted. "Emily," he began, his tone more serious than she had ever heard before. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Emily swallowed, her nerves fluttering in her chest. "Of course," she said, trying to steady her voice. "What is it?" Vincent stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been thinking a lot about the way I've treated you," he said slowly. "I've always been someone who keeps others at a distance, someone who doesn't let people in. But with you, it's different." Emily's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. She had never expected this kind of conversation, not from someone like Vincent. "I've seen what you've done for Marco," he continued. "I've seen how you care for him, how you protect him. And I've come to realize something. I trust you, Emily. I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in a long time." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Emily could hardly breathe. She had spent so long being invisible, being just another face in the background, that she didn't know how to respond to this kind of recognition. She didn't know how to respond to being seen, really seen, for the first time. Vincent reached out then, his hand gently resting on hers. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that I don't take this lightly. You've earned my trust, and that's not something I give easily." Emily's heart raced as she looked at him, her mind spinning. This wasn't just about Marco anymore. It wasn't just about the job. This was about something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to think about. Something that scared her. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Vincent's gaze softened as he stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming in its intensity. "I'm saying that I care about you, Emily," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm saying that I want you to be a part of my life, in whatever way you choose. You've become someone important to me." Emily's world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had never imagined that her life could change this way. She had never imagined that Vincent, a man who had always been so controlled, so distant, could feel this way about her. She had never imagined that she, a maid in his house, could be someone worth caring for. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything right now," Vincent said gently. "I just want you to know how I feel. And when you're ready, we'll talk more. I don't want to rush you into anything." Emily's mind was a whirlwind, but there was a part of her, a small part, that couldn't help but feel relieved. She had always kept her walls up, always kept everyone at a distance. But Vincent was different. He wasn't asking her to change who she was. He wasn't asking her to be anything other than herself. And for the first time, Emily felt like she could breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. Vincent smiled softly, a warmth in his gaze that made Emily's heart flutter. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice tender. "You've done enough already." In that moment, Emily realized that everything was changing. Her life, her future, everything was shifting in ways she hadn't expected. But as she stood there, looking at Vincent, she felt something stir within her. Hope. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel it. As the weeks passed, Emily found herself settling into a new rhythm in Vincent's world. She had never imagined that she would find herself so deeply entwined in the life of the man who had once been her employer. And yet, here she was, not just taking care of his son, but becoming a part of his world in ways she had never anticipated. It was a strange feeling, but one that Emily couldn't deny. Every day, she spent more time with Marco, watching him grow and change before her eyes. She taught him new words, helped him explore his surroundings, and watched as he began to trust her in ways that filled her heart with pride. But it wasn't just Marco that was changing. Emily herself felt different. She had always been the invisible one, the quiet worker in the background. But now, she felt like she mattered. Vincent's presence in her life, though still somewhat distant, was a constant reminder of how much had changed. There were moments when he would seek her out, asking for her opinion or simply checking in on how she was doing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Emily feel like she wasn't just another face in the house. She was important. One afternoon, after Marco had gone to bed, Emily found herself sitting in the study, the soft glow of the fireplace, casting a warm light over the room. She had been reading, but her thoughts kept drifting to Vincent. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change the course of her life even more. The door to the study creaked open, and she looked up to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily's heart fluttered in her chest. "May I come in?" Vincent asked, his voice softer than usual. Emily nodded, her breath catching. "Of course," she said, setting her book aside. Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He walked over to the fireplace, his back to her for a moment as he stood in front of it, his gaze fixed on the flames. Emily watched him, unsure of what to say. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken. After a long pause, Vincent turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. "Emily, I've been thinking," he said, his voice quiet. "About us. About everything." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't want to rush you into anything," he began, his tone serious. "But I think it's time we talk about where we go from here." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Where we go from here," she repeated. Vincent nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You've become more than just my son's nanny, Emily," he said, his voice steady. "You've become someone important to me, and I think it's time I asked you what you want." Emily was silent for a moment, her mind racing. What did she want? She hadn't thought about it in those terms. She had always been focused on surviving, on doing her job, and getting through each day. But now, with Vincent's words hanging in the air between them, she realized that maybe she did want more. Maybe she had already started to see a future with him. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. "I never expected any of this. I never expected to be here, in this house, with you." Vincent stepped closer, his eyes softening. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said gently. "I just want you to know that I care about you, and I want to know if you feel the same." Emily's heart was pounding in her chest as she looked at him. She had always felt like she was meant to be in the background, meant to stay quiet and invisible. But now, with Vincent standing before her, she realized that maybe she didn't have to stay hidden anymore. Maybe she could have a place in the world, a place where she mattered. "I do feel the same," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vincent's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "I'm glad," he said, his voice low and sincere. For a moment, they stood there, their hands clasped together, the silence between them filled with the weight of their words. Emily felt something shift inside her, something that told her that this was only the beginning, that the life she had known before, the life of being invisible, was behind her now. And whatever came next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. Vincent was there, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had someone who saw her, someone who cared. And in that moment, she realized that she had a future. A future that was her own, shaped by her choices and the love she had never thought possible. The days following Vincent's declaration of trust felt different. The walls that had surrounded Emily's life began to crumble, piece by piece. She was no longer the invisible maid, the quiet servant who lived in the shadows. The subtle shifts in her interactions with Vincent and the way she was slowly accepted into the folds of his world were undeniable. But it wasn't just about status or being seen. It was about something deeper. Emily began to see Vincent not just as the mafia boss who ran a powerful empire, but as a man who had spent his life hiding behind his authority and control, afraid to let anyone in. She had crossed that line when she chose to care for his son, when she chose to give him something he had never expected, compassion. Vincent, for all his power, was human. And in those quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, when Marco was asleep, or when they shared a look across a room, Emily felt something stir. Inside her, it was a connection that neither of them had anticipated. One evening, as Emily sat by the fire in the library, flipping through an old book, Vincent appeared in the doorway. She looked up, surprised to see him standing there. He had a soft smile on his face, but it was the kind of smile that seemed new to her. It wasn't the controlled, distant smile of the mafia boss. This was something different. "I was wondering if you had a moment," he said, his voice calm and steady. But there was a certain warmth in it that caught Emily off guard. "Of course," she replied, setting the book aside. She had grown used to his presence. But there was something about tonight that made her nervous, as though something important was about to unfold. Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "I've been thinking," he began, his gaze fixed on her. "About everything. About us." Emily felt her pulse quicken, her heart beating faster in her chest. She had always known that the boundaries between them were delicate, but in that moment, they seemed to be shifting again. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent walked toward her, his footsteps quiet on the soft rug. "I think I've been holding back for far too long," he said. "And I've realized that I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to keep you at a distance, not when you've done so much for me, for Marco." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say. She had spent so much of her life holding back, keeping herself small, keeping her feelings hidden. But now, with Vincent standing in front of her, looking at her with such sincerity, she felt the walls she had built around her start to crumble. "You've changed me, Emily," Vincent continued, his voice soft, but intense, "in ways I never thought possible. You've made me see things differently, made me understand that there's more to life than control and power. There's connection." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never heard him speak like this before, not with such vulnerability. It was as though he had opened a part of himself to her that he had kept hidden for so long. "I don't know what this means, Vincent," Emily whispered, her heart racing. "I don't know where this is going." Vincent stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "I don't know either," he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I know that I want to find out. I want to see where this takes us." Emily's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about a job, or about caring for Marco anymore. This was something deeper, something that went beyond the boundaries of what either of them had expected. "I never thought I'd be here," Emily said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I never thought I'd be standing here with you." Vincent smiled, the expression softening his features in a way that was rare for him. "I never thought I'd be here either," he said. "But now that we're here, I don't want to go back to the way things were. I don't want to keep living in the past, hiding from what's real." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew that she wasn't alone. She had Vincent by her side, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered. She wasn't just the maid, the invisible worker in the background. She was someone who was seen, someone who had a place in this world. And for all the uncertainty that lay ahead, she knew that she would face it with Vincent by her side. The next few days passed in a blur of small moments, moments of connection, of understanding. Vincent continued to show her a side of himself she had never seen before, a side that was not just the mafia boss, but a man who had been shaped by loss and pain, but who was learning to open up to the possibility of something more. Emily found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. And as much as she had tried to guard her heart, she could no longer deny the feelings that had blossomed between them. One evening, as they stood together in the garden, Vincent took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "You've given me something I never thought I'd find, Emily," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You've given me a chance to be something more than I've ever been. And I want to do the same for you." Emily looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "Was needed," she replied, her voice steady, though there was a quiet pride in her tone. Vincent turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers. "That's the thing, Emily," he said. "You've done what was needed. And more." Emily didn't know how to respond. It wasn't just the fact that Vincent had placed his trust in her, that he had made her a part of his son's life. It was the way he spoke, the way he looked at her now. "I don't think I can ever thank you enough for what you've done for Marco," Vincent continued, his voice softer now, as though he were speaking from a deeper place than she had ever heard before. "You've given him something I couldn't." Emily felt her heart swell at his words. "He's a special child," she said quietly. "I only did what I thought was right for him." Vincent smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I don't just mean for Marco," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I mean for me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emily's breath caught in her throat. I don't know what to say," she whispered, unsure of how to handle the intimacy in his words. Vincent's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to her. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "But I wanted you to know. I've realized something." Emily's pulse quickened. "What have you realized?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent took a deep breath, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I've spent my life trying to control everything, to build this empire of power and influence," he said. "But I've come to see that what really matters isn't control. It's connection." Emily felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth that spread through her as he spoke. It was as though the walls between them, the walls he had built so carefully, were slowly beginning to fall. "I've never known anyone like you, Emily," Vincent continued. "You've shown me that. And for that, I'm grateful." Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw him not as the man who ruled with an iron fist, but as someone who was willing to let down his guard, someone who was willing to let her in. "I never expected this," Emily said softly, her
heart full of emotion. "I never thought I would find myself here, in this place, with you." Vincent reached out, his hand gently resting on hers. "Neither did I," he said quietly. "But now that we are, I don't want to go back to what it was. I don't want to hide anymore." The words felt like a promise, like a shift in the foundation of everything they had built. Emily didn't know where this would lead. She didn't know what the future held. But in that moment, with Vincent standing there beside her, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. She had found something in him. Something unexpected. Something real. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a place. Not just in this house, but in his world. The world they had begun to build together. The world that was now, at last, within reach. The days turned into weeks. And with each passing day, Emily found herself becoming more and more a part of Vincent's world. It was no longer a world she was observing from the outside. From a distance, she was living it, breathing it, and finding herself in places she never imagined. The house that once seemed so grand, so intimidating, now felt like home. Marco's laughter echoed through its halls, filling the emptiness with warmth. And Vincent, always so careful with his words and actions, was now offering her something she had never thought possible. Trust, companionship, and something deeper. An emotional connection that was slowly unraveling the walls that both of them had spent years building. One afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the windows, Vincent and Emily stood together by the piano in the living room. Vincent had once told her that music had always been a part of his life, though he rarely played. Today, however, he seemed to be lost in thought, looking at the piano with a distant expression. Emily noticed the way his fingers hovered over the keys, as though he was debating whether or not to play. "Do you ever play?" she asked gently, her voice soft, so as not to disturb the moment. Vincent looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I used to, he said quietly. When I was younger, my mother loved music, and she would always encourage me to play. Emily could see the flicker of nostalgia in his eyes. Something tender and fleeting. But not anymore? She asked. Vincent shook his head, his gaze shifting back to the piano. I lost something when she died, he said, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I lost my connection to that part of myself. Music was a way for me to cope, to remember her, but when she was gone, it didn't feel the same anymore. Emily's heart ached for him. She knew what it was like to lose someone, to feel like a part of you had been ripped away. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Vincent met her gaze, his eyes softening. It's all right, he replied. We all have our ways of coping, don't we? Emily nodded, her fingers lightly grazing the piano keys. A gesture of comfort she hoped he would understand. Maybe you'll play again someday, she said softly. When you're ready. Vincent smiled, a genuine smile this time. Maybe, he agreed. The moment hung between them, full of unspoken understanding. They didn't need words to fill the silence. It was enough to simply be in each other's presence. Over the next few days, Vincent began to open up more. Not just about his past, but about the future. They would talk late into the night, sharing thoughts, dreams, fears, and hopes. And with each conversation, Emily began to feel more grounded in her place. Not just in his world, but in her own. She had always thought of herself as someone who lived in the margins, on the edges of the world. But now she felt as though she had a stake in it. She had a voice. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly being heard. One evening, after a long day spent with Marco, Vincent invited her to join him for dinner. It was rare for them to have a quiet meal alone, away from the business meetings, the staff, and the pressures of the outside world. As they sat together, the soft glow of candlelight flickering between them, Emily realized how far they had come in such a short amount of time. There was still so much they didn't know about each other, so much left unspoken, but there was something real here, a connection that had grown stronger with every passing moment. I've been thinking about what comes next, Vincent said, his voice thoughtful as he cut into his steak. Emily looked up from her plate, her curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She asked. Vincent paused for a moment, his knife resting against the edge of his plate. About everything, he said. About my life. About the direction I want to take. I've spent so much time building this empire, protecting it, that I forgot what really mattered. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected Vincent to say something like that. He had always been so focused, so driven by his ambition. What matters to you now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent met her gaze, his expression serious. You, he said simply. You matter to me, Emily. The words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that someone like Vincent, someone who had always been so powerful, so unreachable, could feel that way about her. Vincent, she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I don't want to keep living in the past, he said, his voice low and earnest. I don't want to keep hiding from what's real. What's in front of me? Emily's heart raced. And what's in front of you? She asked softly. Vincent's eyes softened as he looked at her. You, he said again. And Marco. And this life we're building together. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. For so long, Vincent had been defined by his empire, by the walls he had built around himself. But now, with Emily by his side, he was beginning to see that there was more to life than just power and control. There was love, there was family, there was something worth fighting for. Emily squeezed his hand gently, a smile tugging at her lips. We're building something, she agreed softly. Together. And in that moment, Emily knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. There were challenges ahead, no doubt, but they would face them together. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she had truly found her place. Not just in Vincent's world, but in the world that they were creating. A world where love, trust, and connection were at the heart of everything. The change that had taken root within the walls of the mansion continued to grow, steady and irreversible. Emily had long since stopped being just a caretaker for Marco. She had become something more. Something integral to the way Vincent had begun to see his world. She wasn't an outsider looking in anymore. She was part of it. Part of the life they were creating together. Every day felt like a new discovery. Not just about Vincent or Marco, but about herself. The days passed quietly, with Emily filling her role as Marco's protector, teacher, and guide. Vincent, once distant, now joined them in moments that seemed so small but meant everything. Morning routines, shared meals, quiet moments on the terrace. It was during one of these moments, a peaceful afternoon that stretched lazily into evening, that Vincent spoke again. They were sitting outside, the fading light casting shadows on the garden that surrounded the house. Marco had just fallen asleep in Emily's arms. And Vincent, who had been watching them both, finally broke the silence. I've been thinking a lot, he began. His voice calm, thoughtful. Emily looked at him, her heart beating slightly faster. About what? She asked, her voice soft. Vincent hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. About everything, he said quietly. About how we've changed. About how I've changed. Emily felt her pulse quicken. You have, she agreed. Vincent's eyes met hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he seemed vulnerable. Not the powerful Mafia boss but a man grappling with the emotions that had always been buried beneath his cold exterior. I've spent my life building walls. Emily, he said, his voice low. Walls around myself. Around the world I built. And I kept everyone out. I thought that was strength. Emily's heart ached for him. She had seen the walls. Had felt them from the beginning. The distance he kept. The way he hid behind power. But now? She asked quietly. Now, Vincent said, his gaze unwavering. I see that strength is in letting go of those walls. Strength is in trusting someone enough to let them see who you really are. You taught me that. The words hung in the air, charged with something deeper than just gratitude. It was a realization, a shift in the way Vincent saw not just her, but himself. Emily swallowed, her own emotions swirling inside her. I never meant to change you, she said softly, her voice trembling. I just wanted to help. To care. Vincent reached over, gently taking her hand in his. You did more than that, he said. You made me see what I've been missing. You made me realize that I don't have to be alone in this. That I don't have to hide behind what I've built. You've made me understand that love, real love, isn't about control. It's about connection. Emily's breath caught in her throat. For so long, she had been afraid to believe that love, connection, and vulnerability could truly be hers. But now, with Vincent's words, with his touch, she knew that this was real. She wasn't just some fleeting part of his life. She was a foundation, a piece of something permanent and meaningful. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent smiled softly, his eyes full of warmth and understanding. Now, he said, we move forward, together. We keep building this life, this family, on a foundation of trust and love. No more walls. Just us. Just what we choose to create. Emily nodded slowly, her heart swelling with something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Hope. They had come so far. Both of them. And now they had a future to build. Marco. The small child they had both come to love more than anything would grow up in a world where love was at the center of everything. They would protect him, nurture him, and show him the strength that came from loving and being loved. Vincent's hand still held hers, his touch steady and sure. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like she had truly found her place. Not just in his world, but in her own. They were no longer living in the shadows, no longer playing roles assigned by society. They were creating something entirely their own, something that belonged to them, and no one could take it away. I never thought I'd be here, Emily whispered, her voice full of emotion. With you, with Marco, with this life. Vincent's smile deepened. I never thought I'd be here either, he said, his voice warm and full of promise. But now that we are, I know it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. They sat together in the fading light, the world outside still and quiet, but inside, their world was alive with the possibilities of what was to come. They had built something together, something real, something that could never be torn down. And as they sat there, hand in hand, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to face, but together, they could face anything. For the first time, she felt truly free. She was no longer just a woman in the background of someone else's life. She was a woman who had carved out her own place in the world, alongside the man she loved, and with the child they both cherished. This was her family, and nothing would ever break them apart.